Hello and welcome to another episode of Chatham House Rules, an INTDEV Connect podcast where we engage senior experts, policymakers, and key stakeholders in candid discussions on the most pressing challenges shaping the international development today. My guest today is nothing short of a development powerhouse. And with the UN and other international missions, he has served on the front lines in some of the world's most challenging conflict zones and marginalized communities. He has led relief efforts during refugee crises, and long before it became a trend, he was a fierce advocate for co-creation and value-added partnerships. Good morning, Kilian. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Mal. Thank you. And it's a pleasure being here with you. Greetings from Tunisia, where I live and work. And let's go and let's see of how we can tackle all these challenges.
So, Kilian, I wanted to start it off by asking you about the changing landscape of the development sector in the development world. And we've seen that USAID has been cut by what media outlets are reporting is almost 90% of the funding has been cut off. We are seeing that the UN is making drastic changes which are still make an impact. What do you think these cuts and these rising operation costs, how do you see the funding landscape change for the development sector in the future?
Well, crisis is always an opportunity. Obviously, this is a major crisis because it's a very abrupt cut to major funding. But we shouldn't also forget it's not only the US. I mean, other donors as well sort of seized the opportunity and basically in a very sneaky way cut off portions of their funding as well. So there is a major crisis as a result of this. We all agree that it was high time to rethink of how this sector, which ranges from emergency relief when really things are happening, fires are burning and wars are breaking out, to development, which means basically long-term issues, health, education, gender. I mean, these sort of long-term investments in people. This wide range is affected, but it has been very unhealthy so far. It's still the remnants of colonial relationships between sort of the rich European, then the American donors and sort of their ex-colonies. And the way of how this whole has been constructed is very driven by so-called ideals of the West, very Christian-led and as well. So, I mean, it's not as sort of nice and naive as many would like to describe it. So it high time to change it. The way of how it has been done was brutal and unnecessary. It will have catastrophic effects because it's not a healthy transition. I would have said, well, try to phase out over 2 to 3 years, which is still very challenging for many because the whole thinking of the sector has been so far, of all the organizations, has been a sort of this cascade of I'm applying for funding, then funding comes, then I have my funding cycle, then I'm spending the money, and so on and so forth. There's an entire industry living from that, sort of 9, 10 intermediaries between a taxpayer somewhere and a so-called beneficiary somewhere else. So high time, opportunity, change, but it's too brutal, too fast.
This leads me to the next question. What are the biggest inefficiencies that you have observed in the development sector?
Well, again, I mean, there is this life-saving first response where there is nothing in the middle of nowhere. People have lost everything and so on. And sort of it's basically trying to save lives, immediate saving of lives. There you can discuss of how that could be done in a more efficient way. Often, and I'm citing Pakistan as an example because I've lived it in Pakistan. I served in Pakistan for 5 years. With the United Nations, with UNHCR primarily, also as Deputy Special Envoy to Pakistan. What was one of the most efficient responses was actually cash assistance, cash transfers in times of crisis. Again, well, in a crisis zone, at the time we had 2 crises, 2009, for instance, displacement due to conflict in the Swat region, and 2010, the major first flooding. So again, a number of people have no access to markets. Yes, there you have to supply items. That's sort of bringing blankets, tents, plastic sheets, whatever, food, so that people survive. Most of the people had access somehow to markets. However, what they needed was cash. And what they needed was access to these commodities. Displacement and crisis is expensive, are indebted. People need then to get out of this. So the response in 2009, which was the first cash debit cards, to be issued to, I believe it was 400,000 families or so, was very efficient. 2010, during the floods, almost 1.5 million of these cards issued to the affected families. Again, very efficient and supplemented. So this is the type of more efficient ways of looking at things. Then it comes this whole next step, which is, okay, recovery, which is then moving into development and lifting people out of poverty into basically the next stage. And there we're having a lot of redundancies. There we're having enormous problems, I think, of using resources more efficiently. And we have a lot of I would say duplication of efforts, of capacities, and so on. And there, I think the sort of what the humanitarians now call the reset, I have called it Control, Alt, Delete. Get rid of everything and restart rebuilding from scratch. That would be the adequate way of doing in times of AI, in times of technologies which didn't exist a few years ago.
We talked about the impact on these natural disasters and internal displacement and the immediate impact that humanitarian organizations can have on people's lives. Well, how can the not-for-profit sector streamline the operations in such a way that it doesn't reduce the impact?
Well, yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, it's called the non-profit sector. I mean, in a way, it is a for-profit sector because it's built on competition. The strongest survive and the small ones, they fail. So there's a lot of competition. Who plants the first flag? Who comes in first, who is actually getting the donor's attention so that they will be the recipients. And that particularly applies for the international organizations. So, you have these huge non-governmental organizations, international NGOs. They basically are the main contractors for governments, and you can't get around them. You are a small organization, be it, in my case, I have a social enterprise, or be it an NGO. You can't get around the big ones because they have the interaction with the donors and so on. So they have a monopoly. They're controlling the market, and they will be very happy to keep controlling the market. So moving out of that model of having these main contractors who then subcontracting dozens of others, that has to come to an end because that is what is costly. And this is where control comes in, which is under this disguise, to be very honest, of accountability. Now, again, let's look into what means accountability. The official reason is we have to make sure that the taxpayer's dollar or euro or whatever is being spent properly. Well, again, the corruption level in the sector is relatively small compared to a general corruption level. The transactional costs of 60 to 80%, to get $1 from A to B, because you're having all these monitoring and control systems, for me, that is where it's very clear that's where the bulk of money is drained away. So, more trust and putting that sort of agency into the hands of the people who really actually the ones who are in trouble or who are in fact the target of the aid, that would be the best way. And cutting out as many organizations as possible. To be very honest, there has to be a cleaning up of the sector. We don't need 100 organizations doing health and nutrition. We don't need 100 organizations doing water and sanitation. I believe in a time, again, of that unbelievable power of connectivity, we can pull in expertise when needed, in addition to what is already on the ground and amongst the people themselves. And that doesn't have to be linked to organizations. It doesn't have to be linked to administrations and bureaucracies, which costs tons of money. The sector has become like the military. You have one frontline person and you have at least 10 people behind. It struck me when I was working in 2022, where I was working in Ukraine for a international logistics company. We were looking into prefab support to displaced or bombed out families. So I was speaking to my colleagues or former colleagues of the United Nations, and I said, you have no idea. At the time when we started in the 80s and 90s, we could actually deliver. And I sat with a friend who was in charge of non-food distributions for UNHCR, and he said, You cannot imagine. I have like 7 or 8 supply chain officers to distribute this one package I'm trying to get out. I mean, I'm having unbelievable levels in between to get one thing out so that the accountability is maintained. So that has to stop. Put again the trust back to people. Well, yes, I mean, people need to survive, so they will sell items they don't need. That's normal. So that's why, again, I'm saying give them cash. And so it's a question of applying mechanisms of identifying the people who deserve it. And that, again, you can do with blockchain and whatnot. Very easy.
So we're talking about a scenario now in the future where resources are going to be very constrained for the development sector and for lots of NGOs now. So which particular low-cost, high-impact strategies have you seen working in these kind of settings where the resources are limited or close to unavailable?
Well, resources, we have everything on Earth. I mean, that should be the principle. We have more than we need in terms of money. There's plenty of money out there. There's plenty of knowledge out there. There's plenty of technology out there. There's plenty of experiences, good practice, bad practice. Everything is out there. Expertise in any form. The only thing is, it doesn't really match very well. Now, again, the logic of, okay, I'm taking somebody's resource, I'm spending it, and then I need a new resource, that has to end. So again, I mean, there's plenty of examples of, there will be always, of course, activities which require somebody to give and somebody will spend it. But that we can limit to a really tiny, tiny bit. Most of the things which are needed can be financed and refinanced and covered by what we already have in a more intelligent way. Money makes money. Ask Warren Buffett. Ask these people, right? They know how to make money with money. The logic of I'm taking money, but then I cannot risk it because it's donations and so on. No, we have to establish investment funds, hedge funds, venture capital. I mean, it starts with that. I mean, if you look into, let's say, the shelter sector, ask the UN OCHA and so on, and say, well, it's about 3 billion in humanitarian needs a year. That was, I think it was 2023. Out of the 3 billion, 1 billion is funded by donors. So there's a shortfall of 70% or so. Anyway, but now don't tell me that those companies which are selling the materials, which is prefabs, tents, plastic sheeting, I mean, anything that has to do with shelter, couldn't invest and put money into a fund which makes money. Again, ask Warren Buffett how to make money with money. So he can multiply, somebody can multiply that money, and you're skimming off just basically the profit. I mean, that's a very simplified way of expressing it. I'm not a financial expert, and that's why they exist. But multiply money with money. Use knowledge, existing technology more efficiently. Pool the resources, bring them in. You don't need always to be on site. I have an example of a fantastic example of how small volunteer organizations are working together in the whole Mediterranean, Ukraine context. There's one guy sitting in Munich, 20 hours a day on his laptop, and he is the spider in the net. And he knows when there is somebody out there doing some community work and blah, 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 and then he says, oh, I need this and that. And then somebody else in the network will be activated to supply that load of baby diapers or something. I mean, here we're talking about small stuff. But you can also multiply that and change that into something else. Now, a lot, again, of what is being done should be taken over by different type of actors. I mean, look into the initiative of the World Bank and the African Development Bank, because 600 million Africans do not have access to energy. And it's called Mission 300. So they have set themselves the objective that by 2030, 300 million Africans get access to energy. And who are the actors? So way of putting, I think they have put so far together with the Rockefeller Foundation about $30-40 billion together, but they're not spending it. They spend on investing and then co-finance, helping governments to set the framework, helping the private sector to de-risk. It's all about risk, investing in grid and off-grid solutions. And again, the technologies we have, but it's about helping the money to get there where it should be. And here maybe, and then I conclude this section, an example. We shouldn't forget that a lot of the social systems we have been invented by industrialists and capitalists, early ones. We had the first social housing in the Middle Age in Augsburg in Germany, because the big textile family, very rich, discovered if their workers die and because they live unhealthily, then they will not make money. So it's that sort of pushing capitalism, pushing investment to realize that we are all together in one. And reading out to conclude that section, there's one sector on Earth which has understood that there are 8 billion people on Earth, and that's the mobile phone industry. They have put a mobile phone into the hands of everybody, but which is again also, of course, I think, a major contribution to development. I mean, that's another topic.
Okay. So you talked about investment, and that's very interesting, and it's very new for, I guess, many parts of the world where investment into growing the fund basically and making it sustainable. What would you say? What other methods would you recommend to NGOs to switch from financial survival mode to a sustainable financial model or a sustainable financial mode? Smarter spending, basically, for greater efficiency. What other methods would you recommend for NGOs?
Well, I'm a fervent supporter of social entrepreneurship. Make money on one side and remain committed to their values, remain committed to social impact, invest. I mean, originally I worked even in France when I was young in a cooperative. So we were the co-owners of our own, basically, cooperative, and we were artisans. But I mean, there's many models. So, and I would say, stop hiding behind the non-profit thing. Everybody needs to eat. Pay yourselves proper salaries, but you have to find what is actually bringing in the money, which is different ways. We have also, interesting, of course, possibilities with carbon trading, which is totally overlooked. And that's again where there should be, and it's usually for small people, it's very small organizations, very difficult because I think it's very far away. But you need to work with intermediaries who help you in doing that. So I think we need to invest in this. But I mean, I have a friend, he makes money actually he's a German, in Ethiopia with improved cooking stoves out of clay. So he sells them to poor people for, I think, I'm inventing now, $5, but then he gets $12 in terms of carbon credit money for this. So, so he's basically selling these things for $17, so he's making profit. So what I'm saying is, I think let's get out of this sort of fake non-profit thinking. It's all about jobs. We need jobs. We, at the same time, of course, I'm not denying that we are all committed to change the world and so on. Here maybe an example. I worked in Somalia a couple of times. First, a couple of months after the US intervention back then in the 90s. And then later on in 2012, humanitarian coordinator for Mogadishu for the UN system. But anyway, back then in the 90s, every artisan, every small enterprise had understood that all this international aid world was looking for NGOs, for local partners. So every small company transformed into an NGO. So they called themselves suddenly non-profit, but they were still a carpentry company. They were still a construction company, but then suddenly they became an NGO. So we had thousands of NGOs. East Africa is an example of hundreds of thousands of NGOs. Everybody and their brothers creates an NGO because that's the sexy thing to do. But in fact, it's, for many of us, it's again survival. And that has also affected the sector a lot, not being honest about this. Pretending that people work benevola and not getting any money. This is, excuse my language and to be frank, rubbish. They need to eat, they need to pay rent, they need to get their kids to school. So let's become honest and let's say, we are a social enterprise. Yes, we are committing that we will put so and so many % of our profits back into something. Yes, we have maybe different ways of functioning and so on. I work currently with a renewable energy company, which has settled in Kenya, for instance. and has committed, and that's an international group. And then we are now launching a very big project in Kenya on e-mobility and energy hubs in rural areas and so on. And anyway, we have committed, first of all, with the way of how we invest to change things positively, provide access to energy, again, vision of access to energy. And on the other hand, to invest at least 50% and even more back into communities, which we're making with primarily renewable energy, or maybe looking into different trading opportunities as well. So that's how I would advise everybody. Think of what you can do as a business, but be honest and be social and be communal. Keep your values.
Okay, so with all your experience, and you've traveled across the globe for all your projects, what do you think is the one most overlooked financial blind spot for the development sector, for the development world?
The blind spot remains, again, put the agency into the hands of the people themselves. The phone industry has put a phone into the hands of basically every human being, which is a game changer and which should be used. We should use that as an advantage to put things into the hands of people. The concept of giving directly, for instance, you don't ask questions, put money into the hands of people, giving people the possibility to become bankable. That's something which I have been looking into a lot. The anonymity poor people are, they don't have quite often identity. In many cases, and I remember very well in Pakistan, when working with NADRA, the National Authority for Data Administration, during the crisis, and how many poor people they found who had not been documented, who didn't have an ID. So an ID that is linked to an address, and that makes you bankable. That makes you visible. And once you become visible, then you can also invest in a person. That means the person can grow, can take a loan, can advance. Again, we should also not, we have made that mistake in humanitarian action a lot. We consider everybody an entrepreneur. So we're trying to finance people who have no entrepreneurship. There will always be people who work for others, and there will always be people who are more entrepreneurial. Access to affordable finance. It's there, microfinance schemes and so on, you'll find all over the place, but it's all then again linked to, quite often, the more clever people who actually will manage. I think identity, bankability for all, giving the opportunity, that access to that world, which is again, driven by the principles of capitalism, and so be it, but let people participate in that, let them get into that. So that's what I think is still undersupplied, if you want.
So now we come to what's next for NGOs. What's the one thing you would advise the NGOs to do immediately if they want to survive in this atmosphere where the USAID has cut off 90% of funding and where the UN is restructuring on a very big level? So what would you advise them? The one thing you would tell them to do, what would it be?
Think about a business model. Alliances, get together. It's get out of competition and group. Create out of competition, create a partnership, joint ventures. I know it's quite often driven by personalities and so on. Get out of that. But for me, the main thing is develop a business model. I'm more basically, I don't care for the international NGOs, to be honest. I care much more, and that's crucial. The ones who are based in the communities, grown out of this, who are working within, and who have been always held by the big organizations at the very short. They have not been fed very well. They have always been suspected of being crooks. They have always been forced to supply things under price and so on and so forth. The so-called localization has always been exploitation. So I'm talking to those ones now and saying, look into which opportunities your area has. Map, and I call this opportunity mapping. Don't talk about needs assessment. Forget about needs assessment. So everybody talks about needs assessment, which makes me thinking about the camps of SWAT in 2009, where people had put in signboards and saying, no more assessments. No, it's not needs assessment. It's opportunity assessment. Which skills do we have? Which resources we have? What could be done in different contexts? I've done this here in Tunisia, in southern Tunisia, in a region which is called Tatooine. That's where Star Wars was filmed originally. And I mean, people run away. There's a lot of people going to the cities, trying to migrate. It's desert, it's arid, and so on. But if you look into the opportunities, it's enormous. So we have done that, be it in agriculture, be it in tourism, be it in all sorts of production of different items and so on. That's what you should be looking at. Look at your strength. Don't look at the weaknesses. Look at what could be done. And with that, and there it becomes, and that's where, of course, it becomes quite often challenging. With a good business plan, that's where you find your partners, that's where you find your investors, that's where it becomes sustainable. So supporting communities, supporting initiatives which drive at business creation. Again, money is not the issue in the world.
Lastly, I wanted to ask you, Kilian, if how can INTDEV help organizations navigate this era of austerity that is now upon all of us?
Well, I mean, I think it's really that sort of accompanying and coaching in having a very honest look and what are you doing? Is that really relevant? And can you not do something totally different? But be aware, if you're not ready for change, if you're not ready to look into a business model which fits into the 21st century, be also prepared to disappear. I mean, that is sort of the coaching which is needed. That's what I call a brutally honest coaching in accompanying. So that is absolutely needed. And in that sector, and saying, well, forget about charity, donated money being there plentiful as it used to be. Come back and be honest of what do I really want? Yes, I want change within my community because you work primarily on the local level with local people and so on. What do I want to change? Well, I want jobs. I want more activity. I want it's more fun to live in this area and so on and so forth. So again, that's what I call opportunities. And then look into how to exploit these opportunities. But don't be donor driven because the donors don't trust them. Be community driven, be driven by yourself. And I think that message you have to, through your network, through the people on the ground, that has to come in. Don't do playgrounds for children because the donor wants to do playgrounds for children. I mean, I remember when the European Union wanted to do some massive housing project in the former Yugoslavia after the war of Bosnia. I mean, every organization suddenly was a construction organization. Every NGO had suddenly construction expertise because there was millions and hundreds of millions for reconstruction available. Maybe it was a need, yes, but is it really your expertise? Is it really what you want to do? Is what you have been doing? No, stay what you do best and what your people need more. And where there is, in fact, an opportunity to create a sustainable business, which helps because impact means having young people have a job, activities, old people being taken care of, minorities and people with vulnerabilities being taken care of. That is what you should be looking at, not what the donor wants.
Thank you, Kilian, for your time and your insights. And for our listeners, if you're grappling with these challenges, if you're looking to transform your operational model or trying to find ways of becoming more donor informed and not donor driven, then INTDEV Connect offers tailored efficiency solutions. Visit our website at intdevconnect.com to learn more, and we'll also include the link in the description. And stay tuned for the next episode of Chatham House Rules on the evolving landscapes of fundraising and how we can adapt with another industry expert. See you next time. Thank you.